Hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Today we are presenting a webinar on suicide prevention and crisis intervention with Amanda T.R. Clements, who is a professional crisis counselor and life coach. Amanda has presented for us before in Los Angeles for a live event, and I cannot tell you how beneficial it was for me personally, and I feel for everyone who attended. It was a really beautiful, almost support group by the end of the event, and I'm so honored and thankful for Amanda for joining us again to do this. Today is World Suicide Awareness Day, and the webinar is in honor of this. And as I said, I feel that this is probably the most important webinar that we will host this year. So from now, I'm going to pass it over to you, Amanda, and thank you again so much for all your support.
Thank you. Let me know when I am good to go here. Beautiful. Okay. So, hi everybody. I am Amanda T.R. Clements. I'm a certified professional life coach and crisis counselor. I specialize in suicide prevention and intervention, and yeah, I've been doing it for the last couple decades. And one of my favorite things to do is to work with really at-risk populations and marginalized populations in terms of suicide and mental illness. And I'm really happy to be here today. Before I begin, I just want to make sure that my slideshow is going to work. Let me see here. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, or if you can't see something, or you need me to go back on a slide or something, there's a Q&A option. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I pulled it up. Okay. So yeah, please feel free to chime in. Like Leah said, I did this live last year in real life. So a lot of my work with people in training is interactive, especially with populations who aren't affiliated with the mental health industry, yet are at the top of the at-risk groups or the marginalized groups. I always want to preface this with the fact that even though that I am a mental health expert, or I'm in the expertise of mental health, you guys are the experts on you. I, full disclosure, don't work in the industry. I never have, but I am really honored, and I've been very work focused and in working with people from your industry and other marginalized groups within suicide and mental illness. So please feel free to call me out if I say anything wrong. I'm here just to learn as much as you guys are. And like I said, you guys are the experts on you. So I can only tell you information that we have via research and all of that stuff. But the truth is that it's a subjective science. It's especially in terms of statistics and the adult film industry, we're really in our infancy in terms of research and studies because you guys have been so marginalized and discriminated against for so long. So really, a lot of the information that we have is grossly underreported information. So yeah, please feel free to chime in. I have some questions for you guys throughout, so I will ask them, and if you feel comfortable, definitely chat and I'll communicate that. But if not, just ignore me and it'll be a rhetorical question and we'll move on. So, okay, here we go. Yay for PowerPoint. And today is in honor of the people that you guys have known and worked with and love within your industry, and even your loved ones who are not in the industry that we've lost to suicide and other mental health conditions or issues. This is really dedicated to you guys and to the people that we've lost to suicide in this industry. Okay, so disclaimers. Who I am. I already kind of did that. Let me do the disclaimer on the statistics really quick. I kind of already covered it, but basically the statistics for suicide is hard to say. The numbers are, you can trust them, they're fairly accurate. However, because all suicides across the board are grossly underreported due to stigma and bias, we really don't have the number. So anything you see that says a statistic or a study or research, you really want to imagine that the actual number is much bigger than what it is. And the numbers are already staggering, but it's important to note that because, I mean, if we're talking about another subject, those are more reliable numbers, but really we just don't have that much information, especially, like I said, within your community. And so it is important to recognize that it's really just the best estimate at this point. Yeah, and then in terms of the disclaimer for intervention, prevention, and treatment, the topic of suicide just in general is very much still taboo. We hear it a lot more often now because I think it's a trend to talk about mental health and suicide, which is a great trend. But still, there is a lot of fear and uncertainty around the topic. And really, in terms of what we know in the industry, we're still in the infancy of that as well. And you guys know better than anyone else that, one of the biggest issues is a lack of access to safe and sex-informed, sex-inclusive therapists who have experience and who are educated in that way. And I've just heard so many horror stories of people going to therapists who are ultimately unsafe. And so, one of my main goals today is to try to walk through this issue and be able to be a safe person for everybody, especially marginalized groups, to come to, because it takes a lot of education and understanding, and really just involving yourself with the people, which is why I'm so sad that I can't actually interact with you guys today, but I'm so honored that you guys are here. Okay. So today's agenda, real quick, we're going to talk about suicide in 2020. I'm going to give you guys a stripped down guide to suicide. We're going to talk about stigma a little bit. We're going to talk about the anatomy of a crisis, and then I'm going to give you guys an intervention toolkit. So really, the main thing today is to talk about intervention, and this can be applied to yourself, a loved one, a co-star, someone you know. It's really for the industry. I wanted to make sure that the information was palatable. It is sourced from my rigorous training and certification programs and studies, so it might look like a lot of information on the PowerPoint, but I really wanted to simplify it for you guys as much as possible. And so if you have any questions, please ask, and we will clarify, make sure that everything is straightforward. So, okay. So why are we here today? We are here today because of this. Because there is an insane amount of porn stars, adult film industry professionals, sex work industry related professionals that are dying by suicide. And all of these headlines are like, why? We don't get it. What's going on? A lot of them are really themed in the whole stigma and the lack of information about why your guys' group is so marginalized. And so we're just seeing such an upsurge to the point where some of the researchers are blown away. These numbers are staggering. The amount of people that had died by suicide at the end of 2017, the beginning of 2018, I believe, was one of the biggest suicide increases in any population that we've ever seen. And so that was really what caught everybody's attention. And that's why we're seeing all these headlines. So as Leah said, this is Suicide Prevention Month. September is always Suicide Prevention Month. And within the month, there's also littler holidays. And today is World Suicide Prevention Day. And this day is specifically to remember and honor those that have passed away due to suicide, and directing those who need it and those who want it to resources and training, just like you're doing today. So I really want to honor you guys and validate the fact that it's early in the morning. You, at least where I am, you don't have to be here. You guys are going out of your way to help yourself, to help your fellows. And really that's the basis of intervention and long-term prevention, is educating yourself on what doesn't work, because a lot of the information that people are spouting about it, and they have good intentions, is actually misconceptions, or not totally up to date. And really every second of the day there are experts in suicidality that are studying to figure out the best ways to intervene and to help people. And really at the end of the day, everybody is an individual, and that's why mental health is a subjective science, because we can't blanket treat everybody. We can't say you are diagnosed with depression because you fulfill A, B, and C. A might look different for a different person, so it really is individual. And right now the industry isn't quite doing that across the board. I think that is the ultimate goal. But really we want to look at things, especially suicide or self-harm, stuff like that in an individual sense. So take all of this information that I'm going to give you with a grain of salt. Of course, implement it like it's a foundation of the knowledge that you've gained, but put your own spin to it. These people, yourself the best, and really what you want to do is make the other person feel as safe as possible. And safe means different things to different people. So really understanding that person, understanding what safe is to that person is really what gets down to it. And apologies, I don't know if you guys can see my face and the slide, my screen sharing at the same time. Can you guys see my face? Can someone chat me and tell me if that, because I don't know if it matters. You can, okay. So thank you. Sorry if I look down a little bit, but I'm looking at my notes here. So suicide is a serious health problem. That means that all the powers that be have collected the information and have agreed that it is a problem. It is, people call it an epidemic of sorts, but it is preventable, and that is the trick. A lot of these things are mostly scary because we don't know what to do. And yes, it is scary because we're seeing such an increase in suicide, but this is why it's so important to make sure that everybody, not just mental health professionals, has this information, because it doesn't take a professional to prevent suicide. That's far from the truth. It really is, it comes down to being in the right moment at the right time and having the information that is available to you guys, which I'm going to give you today. So I think for me, one of the biggest problems or misconception is that we talk about suicide like it's a problem. And the truth of the matter is that suicide is the solution. It is not at the moment, it is not the problem. It's exactly what the person has thought is the only solution to their problems, right? So instead of looking at suicide as a problem and I know it kind of like depends on the language you're using and in the context, of course, but looking at it like that it's a solution, I think it really shifts perspective into what we're dealing with here, and refocusing our intervention skills, our coping skills to the real problem, which isn't necessarily the suicide. It's the perspective of what is the solution here, and what is an alternative solution. Suicide is complex. It's extremely layered. It might seem very straightforward on paper. It's suicide. It's killing yourself. It's that, but it is extremely complex. It's layered in every population that has different layers to it. And it's so much more than just the act itself. The common misconceptions, the history of suicide, the lack of development and information, the overall society's fear around it, both good and bad, is both adding and detracting from suicide. And really, I've broken down this layered topic today into three main categories. That's suicide as a crisis, suicide intervention, and then advocacy. And all of that together is under the suicide prevention umbrella. And within all of these categories, suicide as a whole, the prevention umbrella, they all share the same two goals. Okay, sorry, Okay, so the question is, I would like to clarify, are you stating that statistically the industry numbers are higher than society as a whole? Yes, and we'll get into that in a few slides. I do have some specifics. Like I said, the statistics we have numbers-wise for the adult film industry, I would take with a grain of salt because there's just such a lack of information. But the information that we do have, meaning the suicides or the attempts and the mental health issues that do get reported, confidentially, of course, is that the numbers of suicide and mental health conditions within the adult film industry are staggering compared to the general population, compared to the average person. Someone who works within the adult film industry and sex work-related industries. And I have to be honest, I do think that these numbers are geared towards performers for the most part. However, based on studies I've read, they have included people that are in multi-roles, directors, producers, performers, stuff like that. So does that clarify your question? I am stating that the adult industry numbers are much higher than the average person or average society as a whole. Okay, so to go back, cool, thank you. So the two goals that they share are to reduce factors that increase risk for suicide and to increase factors that promote, support, treatment, coping alternatives, and resiliency. And I think those are some of the two most important things for people in your industry, because the stigma that is against your industry plugs in exactly to these things. So if the two goals are to reduce the factors that increase risk, well, you guys are at much higher risk, not just for suicide, but for everything else that falls under the category that leads to suicide: mental health, violence, discrimination, financial, job insecurity, job devaluation, human invalidation, just all of these things. You guys are at much higher risk because of stigma and historical stigma and modern stigma and misconceptions and all of that stuff. The next one, you guys have, the goal is to increase factors that promote help. You guys have much greater barriers than the average society, the average person in America, to get that support. And one of the biggest reasons is because there's a extreme lack of professional mental health people who are trained to be sex inclusive, sex worker inclusive, and those that have the desire to want to learn about trauma-informed therapy, and are kind of buying into these big misconceptions that we'll look into, but that you guys know better than anyone. So yeah, true prevention isn't just for the professionals. It goes on every level. Every single one of us can play a part in suicide prevention. So the place I want to start is our words and how we talk about suicide. So this one says, never underestimate the weight of your words. Suicide starts with a comfort in asking and talking about suicide. Language matters, words we use matter, effective messaging matters. So let's go into exactly what suicide is. We'll go this fast because I mean, it's kind of obvious, right? Suicide, as per the dictionary, suicide is when a person performs a deliberate act resulting in voluntary death. The CDC basically says the same thing. They include injuring yourself, which would fall under self-harm. And my own definition is that suicide is both a route and or an end goal a person explicitly utilizes to voluntarily and intentionally take their own life. So some key terms, and please chime in if you guys either know or have questions about these, if something falls under them. Suicide attempt, non-fatal, self-directed, potentially injurious behavior with the intent to die attached to it. If the intent to die is not attached to it, that would be called self-harm. And self-harm can happen for a number of reasons. People can self-harm with the intent to hopefully die. Maybe not, maybe they're not like, maybe they're ambivalent. Maybe they don't care either way. Some people are self-harming because of emotional pain or physical pain. There's a lot of different reasons. Suicidal ideation is a hard one because they're kind of talking about a few different things. It's usually passive thoughts about wanting to be dead. They would look like stuff like, I just want to disappear. The message behind that is that I don't want to maybe physically kill myself, but I wish I could be removed from whatever is going on in my life right now. But some people also refer to suicidal ideation as active thoughts about killing oneself, not accompanied with the behavior. So the planning ahead, the, oh, I'm for sure going to do it thoughts, I just need to wait until this, and this fall in line. So when someone refers to suicidal ideation, I guess the smartest thing to do is to really clarify, are you having active thoughts or passive thoughts? I always tell my clients that suicidal ideation is pretty normal for the most part. Passive thoughts, fantastical thoughts. I mean, all of us have been sitting in traffic at one point, like, oh my God, I'm going to kill myself. I wouldn't necessarily include that as suicidal ideation, but I mean, technically it's passive thoughts of, wishing that you weren't in the situation you're in. It's just a really low level of stress. Suicidal behavior includes anything that is under that umbrella of suicide attempts. They are behaving or saying something that's considered a warning sign or a risk factor. Any preparatory behaviors, meaning going to the store to buy poison or whatever. Suicidal thoughts, again, we have active and passive. Active insinuates that you are actively, like, you're thinking about an active plan. Passive is you are just demonstrating the pain that comes with suicidal thoughts, and not having any plan or intention to actually hurt or kill yourself. Self-harm we went over. Ambivalence is huge. It's involved in every stage of crisis from beginning, middle to end, as far as we know at this point in research, that is, which is kind of a hot topic because people who have died by suicide, you would think, or you could say, well, they weren't ambivalent about suicide at all. And we think there's kind of both an emotional and a biological response. Our bodies are kind of conditioned to as survival of the fittest, and that's why we can't actually we can't like drown ourselves unless we have an outside force helping us, because our brain and our body automatically wants to go and save us or make sure that we don't die. So we kind of have this layered, complex level of ambivalence. Maybe you guys have heard, I sure have heard a lot of stuff about hearing people who have attempted suicide, and as soon as they take the first action step towards doing so, they have overwhelming thoughts of wanting to live or regretting what's happening. And again, we don't really know if that's the biological response, survival coming in, or if that is a true emotional thought in the moment after taking that first step. Mental illness is the umbrella. Psychiatric disorders is another term for the umbrella term of what mental illness is. These are all the different things that you can be diagnosed with. They can be personality disorders, mood disorders, psychiatric disorders. They affect your behavior. And mental condition would be a symptom or a behavior of the illness itself or the disorder itself. A suicide survivor is, and this is another one that's kind of commonly misconstrued, is someone who knows someone, usually a family member or a partner, best friend even, that has died by suicide. So because you guys are here, because you guys work in the adult film industry, I am going to guess, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that most of you know someone that's fairly close to you that has died by suicide. If not, you would know at least one person who has attempted suicide. And I actually can't see how many people have joined us, but please in the chat, if you feel comfortable, let me know if you have been personally affected by suicide as a suicide survivor, meaning someone that you know, love, has either died by suicide or has attempted suicide. Just out of sheer curiosity and wanting to really, pass the attention more on you guys here, I would just love to hear this, just to see how suicide has affected all of you guys. And of course, there is the option just to send it to me privately if you don't want it publicly out there. But yeah, I am curious to see that. If you want to specifically refer to a survivor of a suicide attempt, you would say it like that. You are a suicide attempt survivor. But when you hear survivor in terms of the suicide topic, they're referring to people who have lost someone to suicide. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So I love Tupac Shakur. And so I have his quote up here. I'm not saying I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee you that I will spark the brain that will change the world. And that is kind of what I mean by how the language, the messaging, vernacular slang is so, so important in terms of talking about mental health, mental illness, and suicide. You just don't know who you're going to affect, what you're going to say. Even if you know the person very well, how trauma and pain works is buried really deep inside of us on a cellular level. And things, you don't know what could get triggered and what could come out. And so using the terminology or the slang that we are seeing is having a positive reaction or benefit to prevention is super important. And I am getting someone here sharing, and I'm hoping this is okay to say out loud because it was to all panelists, that they lost their brother, or their brother was suicidal 5 years ago. Fortunately, his wife intervened and got him to a local psychiatric hospital, and he stayed there. And happy to report, I'm happy to hear that too. And we'll go over more of this later, but I would say one of the most important things to know knowledge-wise about suicide is that someone who has attempted suicide is at the highest risk. It is the highest, most important risk factor in predicting future suicide attempts. So anybody who has suicidal thoughts previously are more at risk for a lifetime of having to deal with suicidal thoughts. Someone who has previously attempted suicide is at much, much, much higher risk than someone who hasn't. It's actually pretty rare that we see one suicide attempt and not another, but that is, again, totally preventable, and it is all about the amount of support that that person receives after their attempt and having a positive experience within the mental health industry. Okay, so here are some of the bad, quote unquote, S words. We really don't want to say committed suicide or completed suicide, failed attempt, successful suicide, stuff like that anymore. Do you guys have any idea why we don't want to say words like committed suicide or failed attempt? It's a question for you guys. And then I'll keep going, but if someone types anything, I'll chime in there. So the reason why we don't want to say these words is because of the messaging. We don't want the true, we don't want our intentions to get lost in the message. And by saying things like this, it does get lost in the message. People get the message that committed is you committed a crime, you're committed to a psychiatric ward, you're committed, there's a negative connotation behind it. Failed attempt or successful suicide, these are insinuating that someone had either the ineptitude to end their own life, or that they did something good or they did something bad. And we really don't want to affiliate good or bad, success or loss, win or lose with suicide. It's neither. It really doesn't fall into either of those categories. Of course, I'm not condoning suicide or saying that it's a good thing at all. But what I am saying is that by using these words, we're just totally judging the person regardless of the context or the circumstances or the details of which we don't really know. So some of the appropriate terms, and really the only appropriate terms, are attempted suicide, died by suicide. I do have some tricks for you guys because sometimes it gets a little tricky. When we're talking about suicide or mental illness, use people first language. That means putting the person before the disorder or before the act. So a person who attempted suicide. Let me give you some other examples. And sorry if you guys can hear my dog barking in the back. Yeah, okay, so, yeah, so we want to do people first language. So Bob took his own life, or Bob died by suicide. Bob attempted suicide. Bob is struggling with depression. Yeah. The next one is a litmus test for terminology is to, where's my notes on those here? Okay. Yeah, the litmus test is to plug in the word cancer for suicide and see if the sentence still makes sense or if it's invalidating at all. We don't say someone committed cancer or like committed any physical medical health issues. So we're not going to say that about suicide either, or a mental health disorder. She isn't just bipolar. She is a human. She's a mother. She is a sister. She is a wife or a girlfriend. And she was really funny and she was good at cooking and she died by suicide. Let's talk about it like that. You know, he didn't just attempt suicide. he was a son, he was a friend, he was a coworker, and he was really good at what he did, and he was a great person, and we want to really talk about the person. Another one of the other things about language and the things we say is that suicide is selfish. We also hear a lot kind of the argument about if suicide is it really a choice, or is it kind of like addiction? The complication within that, is it people's choices, or does it have something else to do with it? And I just urge you, for time, I could go into it, but for time purposes, just to kind of maybe Google those things and see what comes up, and just kind of get both sides of the spectrum on those things. Okay. So yeah, the biggest thing with language is just to say it. Don't be nervous about any verbiage, even if you're worried that you're going to say something wrong, like you're accidentally going to say committed suicide. That's okay. In the beginning, you'll catch yourself, and then you will correct yourself. And that is the most important part. So you want to be as straightforward and direct as possible. Why? Because this communicates to the person that you're not scared to talk about it. You don't have any judgment. You're unbiased. Hey, are you having thoughts of suicide? Are you having thoughts about killing yourself? Hey, I'm observing some behaviors that making me nervous. Why? Well, because there are risk factors for suicide, and I'm worried about you. A lot of people, because of the taboo, because of the weird fear around it, we kind of skirt around the questions, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Or have you ever thought about maybe, I don't know, harming yourself? I don't know. Just say it. Suicide, died by suicide. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Is okay. You really just want to go there. The more direct you are, and the more confident, comfortable, straightforward you are, the more comfortable and straightforward the person will be with you. And these are just some examples of how you can say stuff to someone. Okay, so scary stats. This is just generally speaking. We are seeing about 800,000 reported suicide deaths per year globally. And we have about 45,000 per year in the US. It's the 10th leading cause of death in the US right now. There is, this is one of the scariest stats to me, but we've seen a 35% increase in suicide in the last 20 years. That's crazy to me. For males in general, we see about a 28% increase in suicide, and in females we see a 55% increase in suicide. And this is, let me remind you, despite over the last 20 years, there's been a national goal to lower the rates of suicide, and so you would think that it would go the opposite way. So why is it increasing so much, even though we're going towards a more modern medicine, more research and all of this stuff? That's why this number is so staggering to me. That's an almost altogether, it's since 1999 to about 2007, we see just a little bit of an increase, but from 2007 to 2018, we see an increase of 3 times. So really the big one is from 2007 to 2018. And of course, now these numbers do not include 2019 and 2020. We did end up losing a lot of people to suicide in 2019, and an even bigger one in 2020 because of this COVID stuff. So I'm interested to see how the statistics are going to come out in the next couple years. For the ages of 10 through 34, which I'm assuming a lot of you guys are in that bracket, is the second leading cause of death. But again, overall, it's the 10th. We see an average about 132 amounts of suicide per day, death by suicide per day. Let's see here. Yeah, there's about 40 seconds between each death by suicide, and I believe that comes out to about 12 minutes. So every 12 minutes, someone dies by suicide. It's pretty crazy. So yeah, depression and alcohol and substance use disorders are the biggest both risk factors for someone who's at risk of suicide, but also in the deaths, in the suicides that we do know about, depression and substance use and abuse, including alcohol, have been staggeringly involved in a lot of them. I do have the numbers somewhere, but they're high. We also are seeing a lot of the attempts that are being reported, we're seeing is in reaction or an impulsive reaction to a crisis. So something that happened that day or that moment versus, pain and trauma that has added up a lot throughout the years. Of course, both of those things both affect a suicide attempt, but people who are reporting suicide attempts are also the circumstances around it. Most of them are saying that the triggering event is something that happened circumstantially in their life within that time period. Marginalized groups and discrimination is huge with suicide. We see all the highest amounts of rates within marginalized groups. And again, like I said, the adult film industry and sex work related professionals, they are all a part of a marginalized group within suicide and mental illness. And even, it's really interesting, within your guys' industry, we see a hierarchy of the marginalization. And according to the research, again, you guys are the experts. So correct me if this is, if you guys don't see this or experience it yourself, but what we see is that who is sitting at the top of the marginalized hierarchy is people who are that don't actually come into contact with the paying client. So camming is up at the top, porn is up at the top, and then somewhere in the middle is stripping or dancing, and then on the bottom are people who are I forget the term that they use for them, but people who are interacting in physical intimacy in exchange for money. And so all of these people are included in the marginalization group that is the adult film industry or sex industry, sex work related industries. But again, you guys are a group within a group within a group. So within your group, there is a hierarchy. Okay, so we have 1.4 million estimated attempts per year. And again, I want you guys to look at all of these numbers and just imagine that this is just a piece of the pie. There is so much more numbers that are not reported to us that we have no access to. And especially within an industry like your guys's, who you guys are really have been alienated, isolated by society. And so we just don't have access to it. Women are more likely to attempt suicide, while men are more likely to die by suicide. There's a lot of reasons for that, but the main reason is because of the method that genders generally choose. Men are usually choosing to attempt suicide with lethal firearms or guns, which are it's just the highest percentage of suicide deaths involve guns because it's really easy to die with a gun. Women are more likely to attempt suicide than men because of the methods they choose, which are usually hanging or asphyxiation or medicated related, which are not as lethal as a firearm necessarily. Okay, so yeah, stigma and marginalization in the adult industry. Research demonstrates that the adult film and sex work related professionals are both a much greater risk than the general population for having mental conditions and suicide, and also have a greater barriers to the treatment of these conditions than the general population. And this is just a fact of the matter. Suicide doesn't discriminate. It affects every single population, every single group. We just see a higher, a higher amount of suicide in certain groups because they're more at risk to the risk factors that lead to suicide, mostly due to the history because of the taboo around sex, the taboo around sex workers in history, and just how it hasn't gotten any better over the modernization of time. It's still just so deeply programmed into us. So we have a lot of bias, judgment, discrimination. And again, the barrier to support, it's just not a safe place. Mental health industry just hasn't been a safe place for people who are professionals within the sex work industry. And this is a systematic issue. This doesn't just go to one or two things. This is systematic marginalization, meaning this has been deeply embedded from the beginning of time until now because of the way that humans have decided to define sex and what it means to society and whatnot. There's a lot of information about all of the, and I'll give you guys this information. Actually, I believe if you see the link at the bottom there, if you go there, it's a huge published, reputable research article, and it has pages and pages of amazing information about the adult film industry and suicide and mental illness and all the things that impact you guys way more than the general population. And these things include, but they're not limited to, a greater risk of suicide attempts, greater risk of suicidal thoughts and ideation, mental illness, substance use, addiction, police brutality, PTSD, anxiety, job insecurity, financial inequality, violence of all kinds, job devaluation, existence as a human, invalidation, alienation to society, discrimination, sexism, racism, sexual assault, rape, and murder, and more. And I know that is really bleak. I wish there was a lighter way of saying that, but there just isn't. And this is why we're here today, because every aspect of prevention, whether it's learning about suicide, learning how to talk about suicide, learning how to intervene and help someone, advocating and fighting for the stigma, all of these things are fighting for everything. It goes to every single factor. And I want to mention this, though, I don't want to get too much into it, because research does play such a big role in mental health, and because there's such a lack of information on adult film industry professionals. One thing I encourage you guys to do is to look into that and to see, not necessarily if you want to participate, but just maybe within the industry, within a safe group, of how we can have safe reporting for people who are having thoughts, ideation, attempts, and people who have died by suicide, just a general place where all of this information goes that's confidential and private, of course. But that way we have access to records. Historically, we just have no records on people who are professional sex workers, because society just didn't care back then about them. And now that we have grown from that place, we have 50% of society who cares, and the other 50% are still not at a place where they could see past their discrimination. So having more access to that information is important, and something I encourage you guys to look into. Okay, so these are the 5 most common and harmful misconceptions that perpetuate stigmatization within your community. This is, again, based on this research article, which is highly reputable. People do take it as much of a fact as we can. So please chime in if any of these look like BS to you, or they are not a part of your experience. Please let me know. I'd be really interested to hear that. So these are the 5 most common and harmful misconceptions that perpetuate the stigma in your population. So it's the government's regulation on sex work, and that professional sex work related industries should be criminalized. It is mostly criminalized for the most part in the US, or else it's highly regulated. And so these researchers are saying that because it's criminalized, it's perpetuating the idea that you guys are doing something wrong or bad, and that there should be different kind of regulation to the industry versus the government's control. 2 is that professional sex work related professionals cannot be a feminist choice. This is the historical definition of feminist. There are much different categories of feminism nowadays, and of course there are some intersectional feminism that falls under the opposite of this idea, but because of the history of feminism, and this was the original statement of feminism about sex work and sex work related professionals, that this has historically perpetuated the stigma. Next, all adult film sex work related professionals are equally impacted by stigma. Like I said, there's a hierarchy within your industry of people who are more at risk. So people at the top, like I said, who aren't physically interacting with the client, they're not as at risk as people who are, but compared to general population, doesn't matter. People at the top are people at the way bottom for the general population. All adult film and sex work related professionals experience childhood trauma in direct relation to participating in the industries. This is probably one of the biggest misconceptions, and it's still a highly, it's a hot topic in the mental health industry. It's something that bothers me, but, and that's why we need you guys to educate us really about who you guys are, how you guys think and feel, and it's just so important that we have an open, safe means of relationship, because everyone, even these mental health professionals, are saying that your relationship to working professionally in the industry is in direct connection to a childhood or sexual trauma, which again can be true for some people, but is also definitely not true for others. So we cannot use that as the basis of a foundational fact for building mental health support for you guys. And the last one is that your work is not real work. It has been historically invalidated, and that is another problem. See here. I'm gonna probably just skip through some of these for some time, for time's sake. Okay, 10 Commonalities of Suicide. So let's really get into intervention. So understanding suicide. There was a really smart guy, suicidology expert, who studied suicide in thousands and thousands of people, and he came up with 10 things that were all common. And so right now in society, we use this as a basis. Of course, again, it deviates individually, but for the most part, when you are dealing with someone who's having suicidal thoughts, or someone who really has the desire or intention to die by suicide or even harm themselves, or any mental health crisis in general, share these characteristics. So the purpose, the goal, the cause, the stressor, emotion, cognitive state, perceptual state, action, social behavior, pattern. So the purpose is to seek a solution. That solution is the goal is to cease consciousness. Cause, because of intolerable psychological pain. The emotion that they feel is frustrated psychological needs. So their psychological needs are frustrated. The stressor was that they're frustrated psychological needs. Their emotion is hopelessness and helplessness. The cognitive state is ambivalence. Perceptual state is constriction, feeling trapped, feeling like there's nothing else they can do. This is the only means of their solution. Their action is to escape their personal circumstances, their emotional circumstances. The social behavior is either a communication of direct or indirect intent. So direct intent would be, I want to kill myself, straight up. Indirect would be giving away something very meaningful of theirs, or getting their affairs in order, or making sure that their beloved pet is babysat, actions like that. And pattern is consistent, lifelong coping skills. And like I said earlier, anybody who has struggled or suffered with suicidal ideation, thoughts, attempts, they are, again, at much greater risk for those in the future because of the way that our brain works in terms of self-soothing and coping mechanisms. We just go back to things that we think are going to work or have worked previously. Okay, so anatomy of a crisis. Crisis is, we're not referring to something bad happened. Crisis is a state of feeling. Feelings of an internal experience that's overwhelming and unbearable. It has behaviors that, I'm gonna try to put this somewhere else so it stops blocking my screen. Behaviors look like former coping or self-soothing skills fail, and ineffective decision-making and behaviors take their place. That's what happened. That's the way the behaviors look during a crisis. And then your perception. So because of all of the different emotions, the severe emotions surging through your body, which, I mean, if we get down to science, the emotions are just rushes of different formulas of hormones. And so whenever we experience any stress, whether that's pain, discomfort, fear, we're experiencing a stressor, and stress releases hormones of adrenaline and cortisol. And depending on the severity or the acuteness of these feelings, that is the more of these hormones are being released. And because of that, it alters our perception in our brain. So decisions are much harder. Thinking straight is much harder. Our reality is distorted. And that's why it's so important to always remind yourself that feelings aren't facts, emotions aren't facts. That doesn't mean they're not real. Of course, they're 100% reality. They're 100% real and should never be invalidated, but they're not the bigger issue, or the bigger pain that we're struggling with is that feeling is not a fact or an indicator of those issues. For example, if we're heartbroken because of a breakup and all the emotions that come with that, depression, let's say, isn't who we are, it's what we feel. We're not, depressed because our heart is broken. We're depressed because of an internal belief that we're unlovable, right? So the anatomy of a crisis, it's a state of feeling, and these three things are always involved in the anatomy of a crisis. You get the feelings. Feelings are directing your behaviors and actions. Your actions and behaviors are affecting your perceptions. Crisis state, when all attempts fail to return us back to our pre-crisis level of emotional balance. So we are feeling upset, and it doesn't become a crisis. It just becomes stress, or I'm, upset, or I'm triggered, let's say, but it doesn't, you can have all of those things and it not become a crisis until you have come to the realization that there's nothing you can do that's going to get you back to feeling at peace or content or balanced. At that point, you go into overwhelm mode, you go into stress and anxiety mode, and that's when crisis begins. There's two types of crisis. We have a developmental crisis. It's a crisis resulting in from normal life change, life transitions like puberty, growing up, moving out of your house for the first time, a first big relationship, a first big breakup, stuff like that. And these are crises that can always occur because life is always changing, and it doesn't matter how old you are, you're still subjected to some life changes that you just don't know how to cope or deal with, and you have to learn the hard way. Situational crises are things that are a result of unexpected trauma or drama. Really what a lot of us use the term crisis for, things that are unexpected and just happen. So there's a death of someone that you love. That's a situational crisis. Or you lost your job randomly, or you heard your partner's cheating. Stuff like that are situational crises. And of course, these things can happen simultaneously and usually do to an extent. Sometimes the trigger is situational, but because of a buildup of developmental crises over and over and over again that's traumatized us, it makes these situational crises, we're so much more subjected to them. Okay, so my big tip of the day, one of my tips of the day. Okay, so a human body physically cannot stay in crisis forever. So this is something I am constantly thinking about when I'm working with high-risk patients who are suicidal or in active suicidal thinking, whether it's in real life or on the phone. And this, of course, applies to any mental health crisis too. So the body physically cannot, or biologically, they can't stand an emotional upsurge for longer than a certain amount of time. There's at some point, the body and brain is going to be so strained by the amount of emotion that the situation is either going to change before that happens, or the person is going to eventually return back to a pre-crisis state. They'll be affected by it and just return to a lesser state. The person will avoid crisis by other reasons if they can't achieve it in a healthy way in order to achieve that. So they're going to be in crisis, and if for some reason the situation hasn't changed and their body can't withstand it, they're going to go to unhealthy coping mechanisms to achieve that pre-crisis state of emotional balance. And so my big tip here is I always give it the 30-minute rule. When someone is in peak crisis mode, and whether they're suicidal or not, I usually tell people or think to myself that this peak is going to last up to 30 minutes max. I don't think I've ever experienced being with someone who's been in peak crisis for longer than that at all. And so if you're helping with other people, or just working on yourself, reminding them or reminding yourself that it's about 30 minutes. And of course, I'm not saying to say this out loud to the person in crisis. Don't say like, okay, you're going to freak out for 30 minutes and after 30 minutes, you're going to feel much better. This is just something to keep in mind, or to advise other people who are helping people in crisis. Because what I want to say is, if the person is in imminent danger, or if you think they could be in imminent danger, the safest thing, if they're not going to allow a 911 call or take them to a medical doctor or emergency room, is to make sure that person is not alone. And if you can't personally stay with them, helping them figure out how they can get in the presence of another person, whether that's a friend, family, coworker, in the public eye, as long as they are not alone. Suicide, I mean, I don't want to say never, because of course it has happened with other people in the room, but it rarely happens. And the risk of someone hurting themselves or killing themselves in the presence of another person is very low. And so I give you this 30-minute mark because if you are with someone in crisis, and of course you want to help, but you can't stay with someone who is wanting to kill themselves for 10 days straight, something is going to change after their body physically cannot withstand that crisis state. They're going to either come down from it because the situation has changed, because you have helped them come to that realization, or they have found some other sort of coping alternative solution in that moment. And a lot of times that alternative coping thing is just being in the presence of another person, whether you're talking or not. is just physically being with another person. And that certainly stops people from harming themselves. So yeah, that's my 30-minute rule of thumb. So the development of a suicide is precipitating events or personal background. Precipitating event is a circumstance or a stimulus that triggers an emotional reaction, and this literally could be anything. Traumatic experience that's perceived or very real, like it could be a lot like a death of a loved one, or just a minor bump in the road, a failed test, let's say. And depending on the person, this can be a life-changing discrepancy. Anything that produces intense anxiety and dependence on problem-solving skills is a precipitating event. So this happens, and again, it could be developmental, circumstantial, or both. Then the coping behaviors come in. Coping behaviors consist of thoughts, feelings, and a leading action. At this point in the development of a crisis, a person's usual coping skills fail, the problem is still present, and the anxiety then increases. The individual then must look outside of himself for help, whether that's in a person, a healthy alternative solution, or a toxic or self-sabotaging one. Then we have the self-intervention, which is they go to external resources, whether that's a religion, a God, a support group, a friend, a mentor, and these also fail. So that doesn't mean that their friend or someone did a bad job or that they're wrong. It's just that your pain is superseding what they said or how they made you feel, or whatever the support group or religion or whatever it is can give you. A lot of times people who have suicidal thoughts, this is a big thing. Suicide is such a finite thing, and their pain feels so infinite, right? So at this point, something must change. Then they have to do something. They have to take an action because the crisis is bad. They feel like shit. They can't help themselves, and other people don't seem to help them either. So what are they going to do? Something has to change. So these are the big three in terms of factors that put someone at risk for suicide and something that causes suicide. And these are the things that you want to get most educated on and most aware of in your everyday life, because these are the things, this is honestly the meaning between life and death in a lot of ways. And I want to put a lot of emphasis on the warning signs in this one. Risk factors, of course, are an individual, all of these things are individual, but we really have like top 10 common ones for each. So there are many factors that help determine if a person's at risk for suicide or if they're in risk for attempting suicide and at what level risk they are. And one of the most powerful ways to do this is having an understanding of these three things. So risk factors are characteristics that make it more likely that an individual could or will consider, attempt, or die by suicide. Warning signs are signals of danger via an individual's mood, behavior, actions, or communication. And they can indicate that they're at immediate risk for suicide or that they're seriously thinking about it. And these can be tricky because they could be very subtle and indirect, or they could be aggressive and very direct. So it's really about learning what the big main common ones are and then thinking about the individual in these circumstances. And then protective factors, or you'll also hear the term buffers. Protective factors, buffers. These are characteristics that make it less likely that an individual could or will consider, attempt, or die by suicide. So these are some of the most, really quick, I just want to, before we go in, risk factors and warning signs, they're two different things, though some of these things overlap and it makes it a little confusing, but it's definitely important to understand the difference between them. Studies show that while risk factors can affect an entire demographic or population of people, and occur more frequently in certain communities or cultures. For example, like we do see that you guys are at risk for, you're more at risk than the average population for some of these big risk factors. Warning signs are specific to the individual. So risk factors can really fall under a community. Warning signs, they're really more individualized. Yeah, okay, so here are some of the most common risk factors. Previous suicide attempts, by far, hands down, is the most important one, and is, according to research and patterns, it is the most indicative thing of a second attempt of suicide. Statistically speaking, those who have previously attempted suicide are 38 times more likely to die by suicide. And that's why this one is so important. Violence is another one. Family history of suicide or mental illness, feeling like a burden. This is definitely a risk factor. It also falls under a warning sign. It is a risk factor because it can be communicated in several different ways, but it is definitely a risk factor. And alcohol and substance abuse or use. This can also include if someone is not necessarily a textbook addict or alcoholic. It's just an increase or an uncharacteristic amount of behavior in this category. The next one is access to lethal means. Someone who has access to a gun is, and who is having suicidal thoughts, ideation, or has history of attempt is way more at risk than someone who doesn't. This also, though, includes people who have a plan of suicide and have access to the means. So, for example, if I was thinking about killing myself with pills, if I have access, if I have the pills in my possession, that is access to lethal means. If I have to figure out how to get those pills or go out and buy them, you know, the risk factor, the risk level diminishes a little bit. Of course, it's easier to get some than others, and so the risk level goes on. Next one is trauma and loss, history of mental illness in yourself, chronic pain or physical illnesses, people that have to deal with lifelong chronic physical medical issues, and isolation. So this can look like a couple things within the adult film industry. Isolation is a big thing because you guys are naturally isolated or alienated from society on society's behalf. Meaning there are some people who work within the industry who might feel like in situations where they're among the common people, average population, that they either have to hide their identity or what they do for work, or they are just braving the fact that most of these people in the general population are going to be judgmental or they're going to misconceive something. Or, I mean, at the worst, they're going to be biased, judgmental, and violent. So just to go, before I move on to this, history of substance abuse. Having a history of substance abuse, so addiction or alcoholism, those people are at 6 times more risk to die by suicide than those without a history. People with mood disorders and access to fatal means are at higher risk of suicide than those without. So those are some of the highest ones. And I just want to mention here how big of a role depression plays in this. Untreated, diagnosed depression. So everyone experiences depression. Not everybody has diagnosed depression or diagnosed major depression, MDD, major depressive disorder. So it is believed that untreated, diagnosed depression is the #1 cause of suicide in general. We see that 90% of people who die by suicide have a psychiatric, mood, personality, mental illness disorder, and depression is most likely also involved in that, which is, we call that comorbidity, comorbidity that can, you can have more than one mental condition at the same time. Let's see. Some of the big ones within the your industry in terms of risk factors are untreated mental illness, violence, and that means police brutality, police discrimination, within personal relationships, and assault, sexual assault. There's a lot of reasons for this. It has no correlation to or because you are working in the industry. It really is because of society's view and the stigmatization of your industry that these things exist. Okay, so top warning signs are, so again, warning signs are signals from the individual, and 8 out of 10 people considering suicide show signs of their intentions. That means that majority of people who die by suicide and attempt suicide are actively showing us signs, and some are not actively showing us signs, but there are just no way to hide that. And so never feel bad about asking someone if they are exhibiting any of these warning signs in addition to having these risk factors. Don't feel shy about talking to them about it. If they're not in a crisis or necessarily showing you that they might hurt or kill themselves, it's okay if you guys want to have a conversation about how prevalent these things are. And this is, I've noticed, I'm observing this, and this is like a warning sign for some, like a, mental health crisis. Like, are you okay? Just to check in. So obtaining lethal means is a warning sign. Someone who has to go out of their way to buy a gun or a rope or stuff like that. Extreme or increased mood, anxiety, agitation, sleep patterns. So anything related to their mental or physical health that seems increased in a bad way or extreme in a bad way, out of character for them. Engaging in risky behavior. Everybody has their own version of rebelling against society or doing things that others might consider risky. So again, this is really individually based. If this person is engaging in behavior that is uncharacteristic of them, that is considered risky behavior. Or just in general, if they're speeding down the wrong side of the highway, that's risky across the board, right? So that is what I mean by that. Increased alcohol use and substance use. Again, if they're an addict already or an alcoholic, again, that looks like an increase, or just people who are not, or recreational users or whatever. It's just noticing that they're using it more as a coping mechanism than a recreational mechanism. A loss of a sense of purpose or no sense of purpose. You're observing them losing interest in things that once gave them joy or peace. Giving away belongings, things of significance. This is kind of like an age-old one, and we don't really see this too much. It's mostly just in like really bad movies that's portraying suicide, but it does happen. And the way that I think I see it most commonly is like getting their affairs in order, especially in adults who have like life responsibilities. They have a house or a rent or a pet or a kid, something that they have responsibility over, and you see them kind of getting their affairs in order in that way. That is a cause for concern. Them communicating in some way that they're feeling trapped. They seem extremely help resistant, meaning they're just, every time someone offers them guidance, support, help, they just don't want to try it. And that's okay, no judgment. There's a possibility that they have already researched it or tried it and it just doesn't work. But just observing their resistance to it is communicating that they feel trapped, that they're running out of solutions here. Hopelessness and helplessness are huge and could be a myriad, I don't know how to say that word, myriad of behaviors and feelings and communication. Withdrawal and isolation, again, out of characteristic withdrawal and isolation. They are exhibiting anger, rage, violence, because they have nothing to lose type attitude. An increase in a fixation of death, harm, and suicide. Those are the main warning signs. And knowing these, recognizing these big common ones that I just listed here are, I can't overstate how important it is and how effective this is to know these and to kind of raise your awareness of these in other people. And again, a lot of these can be subtle, but they don't all have to be. Studies have found that hopelessness is a strong predictor of suicide. So an increase in hopelessness over time is something to be aware of. Again, 8 out of 10 people considering suicide give some sort of sign. So they exhibit some of these. People who talk about suicide, threaten suicide, or call suicide crisis centers are 30 times more likely than average to try and kill themselves. So if you know anyone, or if you are someone who talks a lot about suicide, threatens suicide, or utilizes suicide prevention hotlines, they are at greater risk. Yeah, okay, so moving on. Warning signs acronym. One that we use to help us remember all this is path warm. This isn't like foolproof. It's not like if you're with a mental health professional and you say it, they're not going to be like impressed or anything. It's kind of stupid, but it is something that has helped me and continues to. Is path warm is an acronym of the warning signs to keep out a look for. So ideation, a fixation on suicide, death, substance abuse or an increase in use, purposelessness, a loss of purpose, a no sense of purpose, an increase in mood, anxiety, or extreme mood swings, feeling trapped, feeling like if they're exhibiting help resistance, there's just nothing anybody or they can do to help resolve their pain. Hopelessness, again, withdrawal from their friends, family, society, their job, their hobbies, an increase in anger and nothing to lose behavior, recklessness, taking more risks, putting themselves in danger, and just an overall mood change is path warm. Okay, then last one is protective factors, which buffer individuals from suicide, crisis, suicidal thoughts, behaviors, and lowers overall and individual risk, helping people save themselves or keep themselves safe. So these fall under external supports, which are people like professionals, your friends, your family, your mentors, your coworkers, your agents, places like going to the beach, going to a religious service, going to a support group, just being in public, and things like, can't think off the top of my head, things like meditation, breath work, therapy, stuff like that. Internal supports are your own self-coping mechanisms, taking a deep breath, pausing, having some alone time, getting 8 hours of sleep every night, your diet and nutrition, physical activity, stuff that you do that helps your internal life feel at peace and balanced. And then lastly, obviously this can also include stuff like journaling, meditation, alone time, social connection, distraction from the problem, like honestly like Netflix or taking a bath, all of those like kind of stupid coping, self-care things that everyone talks about. Again, it's for you, it's for the individual. So if they make you feel better, those are things to keep in your protective factor repertoire. And then the last one is access to care and effective treatment. And this is why your guys' industry and community is so marginalized and at risk, because this protective factor is basically marked off your list. For the most part, on average, people who work in the industry do not have access to care and effective treatment. They have access to care and treatment, but it's going to be, for the most part, unsafe or feel unsafe or has felt unsafe. So really the lack of access to support is really, it basically doesn't balance out the warning signs and the risk, is if you don't have the protective factors to correlate with these things, the warning signs and the risk factors are going to be more effective. So, Yeah, so even, and I want you to keep in mind, of course, that even if all of these things are present, even if you or a person has 10 external supports and they have 10 internal supports that they've utilized in the past, and they have access to therapists and blah, 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 that does not mean necessarily that they're not at risk. This just protects them or buffers them. For some people, it just doesn't matter as it is right now. So here's your toolkit, how to help someone in crisis. Most valuable qualities in order to help someone in a crisis. And again, this is geared towards suicide, but also other mental health crises that can lead to suicide. These are, this was curated for the adult film industry and other sex industry related professionals. So these are, if you want to ever like screenshot or take notes, this is the time. So most effective or valuable and effective qualities to possess when you're helping someone: active listening, empathy, collaboration and problem solving, and information gathering. These are actually very complex, but I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible so that you can apply these to crises that you could be in the future. So no individual automatically is born with all 4 of these things and are perfect at it. In fact, even people who are the best at suicide intervention and mental health professionals don't have these things naturally. For me, these are things that I actively have to work on, and these are things that I actively have been burned out with and have to take a break from, but they're things that I constantly work on, and humans constantly need to work on every day in order to evolve and get really good at them. So active listening is the ability to understand what a person is saying. Everybody has their own individual perception of life, and so their beliefs, their truths, are very real, and we are not anyone to invalidate that for them. But it is hard for us to completely understand the messaging or what they truly feel. And so active listening isn't listening to respond. Active listening is solely with the intent of curiosity and to understand what they're saying. So instead of listening to someone and responding in like you would in normal conversation, a lot of the times you want to get clarity, ask questions, because for the most part, you'll be able to relate to a lot of the things they're talking about. You've experienced pain, you've experienced depression, you've experienced crisis or loss, but your experience of these things, even if it's sadness and anger, are going to feel much different and affect your body and your world differently than for another person. So a really corny way to say it is to listen with your heart. The next one is, another tip for active listening, and this is beneficial for the person in crisis, is showing them that you're listening by giving them physical, like bodily cues, and subverbal cues that you're listening. So nodding your head, making direct eye contact, doing things like not overboard, because that will come off as facetious or sarcastic, but just to let them know that you are with them. You're staying where they're at. Empathy, of course, is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And if you can't, which is very much a common thing, a lot of us have different experiences than the other, but also to recognize if you do have that experience, it probably was different. And so if you can't put yourself in someone's shoes, empathy is putting 100% of your trust into their experience, that is their experience. So much of the time, especially with people you're close to and friends and family members who you've experienced a lot with, them going through crises or getting emotionally upset, you can sometimes get burnt out or annoyed or triggered by it, maybe because you think they're overreacting, and maybe they are. But empathy doesn't look at that. Empathy is just the ability to trust what the person is feeling is real, that their reality is real, and validating that for them, and also offering them compassion. One side tip I want to give you guys, just in case you are in this situation, someone who is in psychosis, someone whose reality is not reality, for example, someone who may be hearing things or seeing things, paranoia. If you're in a situation with someone who is experiencing a reality that is clearly not reality, a lot of the times we see this with people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia, psychiatric disorders like that. In order to keep you safe and them safe, the best thing to do is to not question their reality. It's totally okay if they're like, I'm seeing purple people, and you want to be like, yo, no, you're not, honey, that's not what's going on. The safest thing you can do for yourself and them is just to, is not to question it, and either to ask them more questions to gather more information about it so that you can pass that along to the next best person to help them, or you want to validate it, let them know that that's not your reality. No, you do not share that same observation, or you don't hear that, but you trust them that they are, and that must be really scary or confusing or frustrating for them. Yeah. So, yeah. And one other thing I want to give an example of for empathy is I worked on the National Suicide Hotline for years and years and years. And one thing that I learned really quickly is that sometimes people who call, who are at the highest risk of hurting themselves or suicide, got triggered by a bad haircut, whereas other people who are at higher risk are triggered because of a parent or a partner died, something really traumatic. And so really being able to step back from judgment and understand that it's not just the haircut, it's not just the death in the family or the loss or the trauma. There is so many factors that go into, that build into a crisis, as we saw earlier. It takes more than just one thing. You can't be totally mentally balanced and healthy and active, have all your life affairs in order, everything is going great, and then you get a bad haircut and become suicidal. That doesn't happen. There's something behind it. Okay, collaborative problem solving is, like I said earlier in the beginning, you're the expert of you, I'm the expert of me. Yes, I'm a mental health expert, but that doesn't mean that I'm an expert on you in dealing with your mental health. I just have knowledge and skills for a general blanket group of people. I mean, that's again what mental health industry is. It's gathering information and coming up with blanket information for the public, and then trying to really individualize it is what makes or breaks a good mental health professional. But collaborative problem solving is trusting that that person is the expert of them, and that you aren't there to advise them what to do, to give them advice, or to be the leader of their life in that moment. You are there to help them help themselves. If you just want to fix them, if you're helping them to fix them, it might be effective at some points, but in terms of suicide and mental health crises, for the most part, people are not looking to be fixed. They're looking to they want their pain to be gone. And if you say something like, yeah, just go to therapy for 3 years and then you'll be fixed, I mean, in the moment, that's not going to be helpful for them. And for the most part, they've probably already tried everything in their coping repertoire. So telling them, oh, you should do this, or journal, or breathe, or meditate, or whatever, invalidates the severity of their feelings and their issue. And what I have found is that people who want guidance and advice will ask you for it. Or if there is something that you can provide them that you know will help, asking them for their consent. Is it okay with you that I tell you about an experience I had that's very similar and what helped me? Or, hey, are you looking for some guidance and advice, or do you just want someone to be there for you, and do you just need to vent? Because I can be either of those things. You just need to let me know what you need. Collaborative problem solving is, again, helping them help themselves. That is the goal. That is the most surefire way to a successful crisis intervention. And then information gathering is the last quality, and this is regarding risk. So what we would call this in mental health industry is risk assessment, which is a very specific, organized model. But for the most part, it's just gathering the most important and helpful information in order to help this person help themselves. So the basic 3-step process and the core 4. Basic 3-step process that's consisted of the intervention format is building rapport, assessing risk, and establishing safety. And initially you want to think about these things as the beginning, the middle, and the end, but once you're comfortable with this, what you're going to see and learn really quickly is that all of these things are going to kind of weave throughout. You're going to need rapport from beginning to middle to end to carry you through. We really put it at the top because risk assessing and establishing safety are useless without rapport. Rapport is trust built, safety built, non-judgment built between two people. In these situations, I'm assuming a lot of you guys are going to already have that rapport built previously if you know the person, so you're good to go. It's just a matter of continuing to validate and to allow them the space to feel and act the way they need to an extent, unless they're in danger, you're in danger. If you don't know the person, building rapport is the most important thing, hands down. Letting them know in a variant of ways that you're a safe person, you're a non-judgmental person, and that you are there to support them in whatever way they need is priceless. Once you have that rapport established and built, you want to move to the risk assessment, which we'll go into, and then you want to move into establishing safety. So, the core 4. This is either going to look confusing or maybe like a 5th grader's doodle, but this is how the core 4 and the basic intervention format interact. The core 4 are the foundation of which risk assessment and crisis intervention are built on. The principles are the main concepts that experts have designed to best figure out the level of risk someone is in, which will allow you to best figure out what the next best thing to do for their safety is. And so I want to go over these kind of in short. So desire means how much the person yearns, wishes, or wants to kill or hurt themselves, or act on their thoughts of suicide. Capability is the person's ability to hurt or kill themselves, their ability to follow through with their potential plans. What this kind of looks like is, do they have a specific plan, or are they just generally saying later down the line, I'm going to do it? Is there a timeline? Do they have the means? Do they have, are all of these things in order? There are a certain number of things that have to happen in order for a suicide to happen. So capability doesn't just insinuate their emotional capability, it's the physical capability, literal capability as well. The next one is intent, suicidal intent. Where are they in enacting their plans? Is their method known? Is their intention to die? So you can have the desire to die, you can have the capability to die, but if you don't have the intention to die in that moment or that day, it's not going to happen. So these three things have to all be in place. And then the last one again is buffers or protective factors. So do they have access to those? Do they know any? Have they used any? Do you have things that they don't have? Stuff like that. And these crazy little arrows are there because they're there to message you that building rapport and maintaining that rapport is required throughout this risk assessment. So when you are gathering information about their desire, you also want to display rapport, which is empathizing, validating, being non-judgmental. And you also want to do that when you're gathering information about capability, intent, and buffers. Risk assessment, which is, again, these core four are the basis for risk assessment, but this one is, I guess it was supposed to say gather information. That's what I wanted to call it for you guys. This is happening. You're gathering information throughout all of these. That's the point of it. And then establishing safety. Rapport is, of course, again, one of the most important things in this part of the plan, establishing safety and going over buffers. You also need to gather information about what they have tried, what they have access to, what they're against, stuff like that. So let me know if this is like too crazy looking or if I need to clarify anything. But this is another way maybe to look at it. I've called this the 4-3-4 flow chart, meaning the four qualities to possess during an intervention as someone who's helping someone, the basic format of intervention, and 4 are the core things that oh, wow, that was a really nice compliment. Someone said it looks like one of the diagrams I've used in the classroom at Hofstra University, and that, my friend, is a compliment. Yeah, so this is another kind of flow chart of what it looks like. You, at the beginning, you are both establishing rapport and gathering information, and then you're going into, so once you have all the information on desire, capability, intent, and buffers, you want to really assess risk, and we'll go into what that looks like. I have one good solid question that will kind of give you an answer about where they're at this point. And then at this point, you'll go into exploring alternatives, which is going to be a collaborative process. That's not you saying you should do this, this, and this. It's a collaboration. And then closure, which is implementing step 1 of the safety plan or whatever you've established at that point. So going into it, and we'll just go over this really fast because I have some tips here for you too, is okay, in building rapport, this is the scale of rapport wins and losses. Everything you see in brackets is, well, actually, everything you see in brackets are things that will escalate the person and the crisis and or eliminate the safety and the rapport. So building rapport is, if you're listening, active listening and listening carefully, you are going to de-escalate the person's emotional state. If you're offering immediate assurance, meaning offering immediate assurance would look like, oh, everything's going to be okay. Well, no one really knows that if that's a fact or not. So we just don't know that. Even if you know for sure that it's going to be okay, I would say someone has dubbed it toxic positivity. There's a lot of that going on in the world right now, and that is definitely one of them. And it also just, it messages that you're minimizing their pain and the fact that they could be suicidal. And expressing your concern, compassion, and empathy. Not overdoing it, but also making sure that all of your statements of empathy and compassion are putting them first. So instead of saying something like, oh, I totally understand how you feel, I've been in that much pain before, or I've been suicidal before, you would say that in a different way that would have a more effective impact on them. So you would say, even if you can, saying things like, I can't imagine what you must feel right now. Although I have had experience with suicide myself, your circumstances and how you feel is so much different than my experience. And wow, I can't grasp how much pain you must be in. That is empathy, that's expressing concern. And that, again, also de-escalates the person and minimizes the risk. On the other side, we see minimizing and discounting. Again, that kind of falls under offering immediate assurance, is just really figuring out what statements are communicating your concern, empathy, and support, and what statements are communicating invalidation or minimizing. Comparing someone's situation or feelings to anything of your own is discounting and minimizing. Does it literally mean that? Are your intentions that? Probably not. But again, we're not in control of someone else's perception of what you say. So you really want to make sure that you're being direct and straightforward and really focusing on them and their pain and in that moment. And in doing that, minimizing and discounting, even if it's unintentional, unfortunately, that increases that escalates them and increases the risk. Identifying feelings, helping them identify feelings is really helpful. A lot of the time, again, when you're in crisis, your mind's distorted, you're overwhelmed, you're not thinking straight. And so a lot of the times they don't even know what they're feeling. They can say things like, I'm sad, I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm numb, but but for the most part, what is really helpful is your job helping them identify how they feel so that they can get a better understanding and get that feeling out of their system is so effective. So people who are having a hard time identifying their feelings would be like, I'm mad. And then you would ask them questions to get more information. Why are you mad? What does it feel like when you're mad? Where do you feel that in your body? You feel it. I mean, a lot of the times people feel anger in their face and in their chest and in their hands, whereas sadness really is in their heart, and anxiety and fear is in their stomach. Helping them identify where they're physically feeling it so you can understand what their physical symptoms are. Also identifying feelings just like, well, this person did this and this circumstance is this, and I'm just so trapped and I'm feeling intolerably alone. And so helping them, okay, so you feel intolerably alone. That must be really alienating, or you must feel really isolated. And saying things like, correct me if I'm wrong, before things that maybe you're having them be the person to confirm if you're right or wrong is also a way to validate them. So if you do want to put, if you're picking up that they are feeling, you're feeling isolated or you're feeling alone, and you don't want to tell them how they're feeling, a good way to say it is, correct me if I'm wrong, but based on all the things you just said, it sounds like you're feeling like nobody understands you and you feel incredibly alone and alienated. That gives them the chance to say no or yes, and whatever they say is the truth, is what you want to go with. So if they say no, then be like, oh, okay, so yeah, so I'm sorry, help me, I'm trying to understand here because I want to help, moving away from painful topics. Other than suicide being taboo and weird topic to talk about for some people, there are plenty of other topics that are awkward for people to talk about or uncomfortable for people to talk about. And just like I said with the word suicide, diving right into these topics, hitting them head first, straightforward, be direct about them is the most helpful thing, because you are messaging to the person that you're a safe person, that you're a non-judgmental person, that you are not afraid to go there, and that they could say anything to you and you are going to still stay there and support them because your goal is to help them. It's not to judge them or minimize them or invalidate their feelings. I have met a good amount of people who work in the adult film industry, and they have, they're some of the best people of crisis intervention because they're just so good at being direct and straightforward about things that society or general population are too scared or fearful or taboo or judgmental to talk about. So this is something that I don't want to blanket say that everyone is good at this, but the people that I have worked with and that I have talked to have exhibited expert levels of this in the best way. So again, I just really encourage being direct and going there, even in topics you don't know about. And if you're worried about the way that you're messaging or saying things, or if you're saying a word that may be ineffective or stigmatizing, like committed suicide, either correct yourself or just say, I'm unsure if this is, just be honest about it. I'm unsure if this is the right way to say it. And if it's offensive or invalidating, please let me know, because I seriously, I need to get a message out, but I just don't know how to say it. Just be honest about it. And anyways, moving away from painful topics, it does escalate the person and put them at greater risk. And then taking their thoughts seriously. Again, what they say is fact. Or what they say, I should take that back, is not fact. What they're saying, how they feel, their experience in that moment is the reality. Do not question their reality. That is, it's unsafe for you and for them to question their reality, but it's also just the most validating thing you can do for another person is to allow them your trust that what they're saying is real, that their experience is real. So in order to do these things, these are some of my biggest tips in order to implement rapport, is matching their energy. I don't mean, so obviously if they're really worked up in a crisis, they're going to be up here and maybe yelling and talking fast and crying and they're not breathing. What I mean by matching energy is like their vibe. So if they're, really upset and up here, you don't want to be like smiling and wave, yeah, and really peppy. But you also don't want to be like match them and be crazy like them. You want to, of course, if they're really up here, you want to bring them down. So maybe just talking extra calm, encouraging them to take deep breaths by you taking deep breaths is a great way. Matching their energy also means like, just allowing them to bring what they need to the table and letting it be on the table. So not questioning their reality or saying, whoa, you're freaking out, like calm down, stuff like that. Use their style of communication. So if this is a fun one for me because I work primarily in my general life with teens, young adults and teens. And so what I've noticed, especially in high-risk suicide situations, if I use their slang and cuss as an adult, I immediately gain rapport points. I could guess why. I don't know why. It could be really vapid, but what I have learned is that it really does help. So if that person is someone who speaks formally, who doesn't cuss, I encourage you not to do that if that's someone, if that's the way that you are. I know I'm someone who cusses every other word usually, and so doing these formal presentations is hard for me not to cuss. But in those moments, if I let the person take the lead, if they openly are letting it out and talking about things in ways that are like really crass, go there with them if you want to. If there's someone who is closed off and more formal and conservative, you probably don't want to use slang or cuss words because it detracts from what you're trying to do. But again, I have found this extremely helpful with people who are in need of building rapport, especially. And let's see here. I realized that, but first I would be the person. Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh. Yeah, exactly. And that, it's like you just said, it's harder to explain than it is to experience. And once you've experienced it, like the perspective shift is so life-changing. But yeah, there's kind of the two levels to this, is not questioning their reality. Of course, you can say helpful things like feelings and emotions aren't facts, they're truth, they're your reality, but they're not because you deserve it or you don't, or because you deeply believe it. On the other end, if we're talking about reality in terms of paranoia, seeing things, anything, especially in moments where people hear or see things, which is common with not just mental illness, but when someone's really upset, their whole system is thrown off. So they really could experience anything, and some things can be very scary, even as the person observing it. And like I said, in those moments, the thing to keep you safest and them safest, because Lord knows what paranoia or these delusions, thoughts or audio delusions can tell them who you are. The best thing to keep you safe is not to question their reality. Again, if they're seeing purple people eater, you don't have to say that you are, but you cannot say, no, you're not. It's just not safe. And if you don't know how to handle the situation, just validate what they're saying and move along. Be direct, take risks. What I mean by that is, say the words that are taboo and uncomfortable and go there. And this Jerry said that was exactly the situation they were in. Yep, exactly. I mean, and it's amazing that you just kind of like automatically did that, because I mean, I had to learn that. I didn't know that at first. I thought it would help them to tell them that they weren't really there or they weren't really seeing things, but really does the opposite. Take risks. I mean, say things, if you have an idea of what could help them, even if it feels like you're taking a risk and maybe you don't know if it's going to work, just be honest. And again, you can always disclaim what you're going to say with correct me if I'm wrong, or this may or may not be helpful. Please let me know if it is or if it isn't. But there's been so many moments where I've been in very high risk suicide situations where I've said things that people who don't know the context would look at me like, oh my God, I can't believe you just said that. For example, I had a lady on the hotline who was standing at the train station, and she was waiting for a train to come, and the train was coming in, after gathering I was trying to gather information about where she was, who was around her, when the train was going to come, how much time I had, right? And so as time was ticking and going away, and I just really didn't know if she was going to be safe or not, I blurted out, okay, you want to die. I get it. And I'm not telling you that you can't or that you shouldn't. I want to validate this for you, that this is very real and it's a possibility. But why this train? She kind of talked about it. And I said, is there any chance that you can stay on the phone with me for a little bit longer, and that there's another train coming? There's always going to be a train. Why? Can you wait? Can you hold off on just this train? Let's just hold off on this train. I'm not saying all trains. And that was a really risky move, because I was basically saying like, sure, go ahead and kill yourself, but just not with this train, maybe the next one. And I knew in the back of my head, of course, that I was planning on getting this person to safety before this could happen. And that was the goal, but I needed more time. And hopefully you guys would never be in this situation that is this high risk and that you're going to witness something. But if you are, I do encourage you to take risks and to kind of, it's just like loopholes. It's like not telling them they can or can't do something, but just helping them see a different way about going about it. Open-ended questions are really important, because that's the best way to gather information. Closed-ended questions would be like, you're feeling sad? Yes or no. Are you thinking about suicide? Yes or no. You want to ask open-ended questions like, you said that you're feeling sad. What is that? I mean, like, what does that feel like? What are the thoughts going through your head? What does it feel like in your body? Where do you feel it most? What triggered the sadness today? Those are open-ended questions. Reflect means when in doubt, just repeat what they said. A lot of the times in these situations, you're nervous or you just don't know what to say. And it both validates them, it both lets them know that you are actively listening to them and that you care, and that's their truth when you are reflecting back to them exactly what they just said in your own words. And it helps you buy time. And again, if you remember that a human body only has the physical capacity to be in crisis mode for 30 minutes max. And again, that's not a fact, but in my experience of decades of working with high risk suicide, people who are in suicidal ideation and in suicidal activity and behavior, that has been true across the board, is that, again, and by the time that their body is worn out from crisis, they could still want to kill themselves or hurt themselves. But what I have gained is I've taken the stress hormones in their bodies down. We've de-escalated them so their decision-making skills are less distorted. They're more able to see alternative or different perspectives. And it's just, by doing this, you're basically gaining a lot of time, and you're potentially getting them out of the suicidal crisis in that moment. Because at the end of the day, we're not trying to stop people from ever killing themselves or from ever hurting themselves. Crisis intervention is about short-term solution. It's about being in that moment. We're trying to stop someone from killing themselves today or in this moment or right now. We're not trying to stop them from killing themselves a year from now. We want to handle each situation in the moment. So if we're talking to someone who's not actively suicidal but has constant suicidal thoughts, you are talking about what those thoughts look like, what it led to last time, and how you can help them from going there this time. We're really just talking about this situation. And if you can help them in this situation, then we can get them to help for the next situation if it's going to happen. Take your time. Don't be scared to have no idea what to say. Don't be scared of silence. Silence is actually a really powerful tool. If they say something and you just have no response, or if you want to really let them hear what they just said, using silence is really, really powerful. People get so awkward with silence. I mean, I still do all the time, but reminding myself in those moments that my discomfort is like a programmed discomfort, and that silence is not only okay, but it's validating. It's allowing the person to feel the way they feel, say what they need to say, and just be. They can just experience these things in this moment. They don't need people to say anything to them, to respond to them. They're just allowed to experience this, and you're allowing that. Tip again, so the info gathering risk assessment edition is asking directly, use empathy, ask core questions. So I want to get into these questions that I'm talking about. Again, the industry of suicidality have come up with a very organized, specific risk assessment that has a list of questions that we ask every time, in our own words usually. And a lot of them are things that we're required to ask because it garners information that we definitely are going to use. So I'm going to go over some of those for you to have, but again, you don't need to have these expert level questions. They're just the message we're getting out of them is what's most important. So you, again, want to be direct. I've already gone over that a million times. Okay. You don't want to assume anything. Again, clarity, reflecting, clarity, being curious, asking them if they're feeling sad, mad, numb. What that feels like to them is going to be completely different than what that feels like to you. So really getting clarity about that. Again, if they're going through a breakup, or if they are in an abusive relationship, your experience, if you have any with those, are going to be much different. So gathering those information. Stay calm even when they're not. That actually calms them, brings them down. Sounds like you're in a lot of pain. I can't imagine, blah, blah, blah. I feel honored, or I'm really glad that you shared that with me, because it's really hard for people to be open. And by you doing that just made me feel safe to do that. And I just thank you for, stuff like that. Okay, so are any of the core four present? The core four being what? Core four being capability, desire, intent, and buffers, and then where they are on the 1 through 5 scale question. The 1 through 5 scale question is one of my favorite things. I do it every single time. I use it even outside of suicide. It's so simple, and it just works like a charm. And it is something that is a part of this organized and specific risk assessment that we have to do, but I'm passing it on to you because it is so helpful. And what this question looks like is on a scale between 1 and 5, 1 being that you're just having passing thoughts of suicide or inactive thoughts of suicide. 5 being that as soon as you're done talking to me or as soon as you're done with XYZ, you're going to go kill yourself today. Where are you on that scale? So 1 being ideation, passive thoughts, or like, I want to die, but I'm not going to do it. And 5 being that they have a plan. They're going to do it. They're intent on doing it and they have a plan. Where do they fall on that scale? We don't make it 1 through 10 for a reason. 1 through 5 really defines it. These numbers aren't to be used as like solid fact. Like if they're a 3, you don't like, okay, well, that means X, Y, Z. It's really to allow you additional information. And I will say, in my experience with people, and I work with a lot of people who I don't have relationships with before, their answer to the scale question might be totally different than everything else they're displaying. They could be super high risk, totally upset, and they could say 1 on the scale. But they've already told me that they have the means of killing themselves, they have the plan, they have a timeline. To me, those are like, okay, well, that seems pretty real. So I would rate them way higher. A lot of the times people have trouble putting themselves on the scale because they can't identify their own feelings, or they're intentionally doing it. They don't want that kind of help. They do want to kill themselves. So they're going to not be honest with you about some of these questions that aren't as direct, like the 1 through 5 question. And so if they say 1, but they gave you other information that's indicating otherwise, that's like, okay, well, I really want to clarify with you where you're at, because you just said you're having passing thoughts of suicide, but you just went out and bought a gun. So like, please, I just need clarity on where you're at. Those things are saying 2 separate things. Always ask the 1 through 5 question. And I also encourage or suggest that you ask this question not at the very beginning, but after gathering some of this core information that I will be telling you about. So just a tip with these 2 things, if let's say 2 of 3 of the core 4 are present and they're a 3, 4, or 5 on the scale, I would say let's move forward with emergency services and or figure out a way that they're not alone until they can be. If 1 of the core 4 is present and they're a 5, that requires probably further clarity and information, and it's best to veer on the safe side. If they're have all 3, but they're a 1, again, now something's not matching up. So you need to help them clarify. You have a timeline, you have means, you have a plan, you have someone babysitting your dog and your child, but you're saying you're having passing thoughts, not even like you're having subtle thoughts of suicide. That doesn't make sense to me. Explain. This is actually right off the website of the people who built this risk assessment. And you can screenshot this if you'd like. You can also access it. I'll give you the link later if you want it, but it just kind of organizes it all out. I actually want to go back to the core 4 really quick so you guys can see. I want to give you examples really quickly of questions that you would ask that would get you the best answers in these. That's totally fine. If you need to leave, please feel free. I'm probably, again, this is totally up to you guys. I will wrap up really shortly. I'm going to give you maybe examples of ask, and then I will go into safety planning and what to do if someone's in high risk, and then we'll piece. So yeah, so desire. So really good questions, and usually I would like to ask you guys this, but for desire, the biggest questions you want to ask are you thinking of suicide? Are you thinking of hurting yourself? And do you feel like, and then go back to the risk and the warning. So what are the biggest ones? Are you feeling like a burden to yourself, to others? Are you feeling helpless, hopeless? Are you feeling like you've tried everything and nothing works? Are you feeling intolerably alone? All of these things will lead to the desire. And I can actually also give you guys a resource that has the core four and like the questions to ask if you want. Okay, so for capability, some questions you ask. So what would be questions to see if this person is capable of hurting or killing themselves? Have you ever attempted suicide? Again, that's the biggest one that you want to know. Do they have a history of it? Because if they do, they are at much higher risk. Have you ever known someone who has died by suicide? Anyone in your family, friends? Have you ever been... Do you have access to a gun? Do you have access to means of however you want to hurt or kill yourself? Do you struggle with drugs and alcohol? Stuff like that. Are they capable? Do they have the capacity? Where are they at with their mental health? Have you been diagnosed with anything? Or are you taking medication? Are you struggling with it? Of course, you don't have to ask all these questions. You can figure out your own questions, but the goal is to get as much clarity and information you can about how much this person is desiring suicide or to hurt or kill themselves, how capable this person is literally and emotionally, and how where they are on the scale of intent. So for the intent, questions would be, have you already done something to hurt or harm yourself? If you're on the phone with someone, obviously it would be the first thing to ask, right? And if they say yes, then of course you want to make sure that they're safe. If they're not, let's get them to emergency services. But this one's probably the most important questions within this one. Have you thought about how you want to kill yourself? Have you decided what you would use? Do you have access to it? And have you decided when? The more specific information a person has on the details of their suicide or harm, the higher risk they are. So if a person has, yes, they have thoughts, they have a plan, they're going to do it next week because their kid's out of town, they're going to hang themselves and they just bought a rope, that's really high risk. If they have high desire, high capability, but they have, no, I haven't really thought of a plan, I just want to do it, they're not considered not high risk. They could be high risk, but they're not as high risk as someone who has a plan, a timeline, and all these things in line. So the more specific planning someone has done and the more specific access they have to this planning, the higher risk they are. And usually after I gather as much information as I can throughout these layers, I then ask the 1 through 5 question, or if I ever need some clarity of where they're at, if I'm getting mixed messages. And again, I want to say the 1 through 5 question is really, really helpful. It's helpful for them to hear where they're at and to understand. It's helpful for me. But also I want you to remember that they could be not aware of where they're at really, or being honest. So that's why asking all the questions and gathering as much information as you can, even if you forget what the core 4 are and all these things, just getting as much information as you can is so important. Even if it means nothing, even if you're like, what shoes are you wearing? What shirt are you wearing? You are buying yourself time, and time is important, right? Because of the body's threshold for crisis. Okay. You guys are awesome. I know this is long and daunting, but I really just want to give you guys, the information that I have. So really quick here, I guess one thing I cannot stress enough is that you, in a situation that you're in helping someone, if there's any chance of you being in danger, them being in danger, even if there's no chance of danger, but you just don't know, the best thing you can do is, and if a person is in fact suicidal and in action, 911, or take them if you can to the nearest hospital, ER. I know these days that's like a controversial thing. It's hard. And I kind of myself, I hate saying call 911 or go to an ER, especially for people who don't have access or just don't have the opportunity of safety like the rest of the world. I just don't have another option at this time. The world doesn't have another option at this time. And certainly you or me aren't people that have the ultimate control of saving someone's life. Only they can. So when in doubt, 911 or an ER. If they're an adult and you can't force them there, the next best thing is to ensure that this person is not alone. And if you can't do it, trying to organize or figure out a way to get people to be with this person is so important, even if they're resistant to it. So if you think they're at high risk, it's obvious they're at their high risk, you really want to take suicide precautions, meaning get them to a hospital, get them to a doctor. If you don't know the answer to that, being with them in person and maybe calling the suicide hotline yourself to see what you should do, or getting in touch with someone like me, what you should do in this moment, as long as that you have something in plan to keep them safe in the immediate. 911, hospital, or not being alone. Those are three things. Moderate risk, I would develop a crisis plan, a safety plan, make sure that they're not alone. If there's any doubt that someone is going to harm themselves or kill themselves, if there's any doubt, you want to make sure that they are not alone. I would say if they're moderate and you're just unsure, but you know they're not in the process of doing it or necessarily very high risk, it's just really making sure that this person has people to be around physically until they feel that they can keep themselves safe, and you trust that. Low level is helping them with referrals like hotlines, warm lines, which I will give you a list of that you can screenshot. Or if you want to give me you guys' emails, I can absolutely email you guys some of these links and these infographics that you can kind of keep with you. And people support groups. Safety is another acronym that the industry is built to help you remind you of stuff. I don't use it, but suicide assessment, 5-step evaluation and triage is they identify the risk factors, identify protective factors or buffers. Thank you, Jerry. Conduct suicide inquiry, which is just gathering the information, and risk assessment, determining the level of risk. Are they high, moderate, low? Where are they rating themselves on that 1 through 5 scale? And what do you think they're at based on all the information that you gathered? And 5, you don't have to document because you're not a professional, but that would basically mean getting in contact with a professional to advise you what to do next. Establishing safety, the person most at risk is someone who's alone. Can't say that more. So yes, ask the 1 through 5 scale question. Ask them how long that they think they can keep themselves safe. Even if they're the highest risk, they're like, I'm going to kill myself. Asking them, so how long can you keep yourself safe for? They have to give you a direct answer. If they can't, I would say, can you at least keep yourself safe for as long as I am with you or on the phone with you? I have the response that I've gotten to that is mostly yes, but if it's not yes, it's I can try. And I've never had someone say no. I can't tell you that that would never happen, but especially if you're implementing these things with people that you know, that's a really good place to start in terms of establishing safety and moving forward is how long can you keep yourself safe? And if they can't, do you think you can if I'm with you or if I stay on the phone with you? And then connecting them to resources. You guys aren't professionals. You guys don't have to memorize all this. You don't have to do it perfectly. Just learning, listening to this information alone is putting it in your body and in your brain. And that's the most anybody can do. One thing I want to really say to you guys, people helping other people in crisis, is that suicide and their actions and behaviors are out of your control, no matter what, on the good or the bad side. You can be the most skilled, amazing interventionist. You can do all of these things to a T and still the person can hurt or kill themselves. And is that your fault because of the way that you implemented all of the crisis intervention? Absolutely 0% no. You have Humans don't have control over other people. You can be, again, the most effective, the best. You could say the best things, the only thing that pierces this person's brain, and still their will is up to them. This is something I constantly have to remind myself, because, I feel my purpose is this, my goal is this, is to help save people save themselves, but really defining what that meant. My definition of this went from saving people to helping people save themselves, and really defining those things for yourself is important. And yeah, I just can't stress enough that being there for someone, even if you flub every word you learned, you don't implement anything we learned today, if it's just you being there, that is still, it's amazing. And it is no more of the reason that they acted on their suicidal thoughts or desire or intent than if you did a good job. Again, the only thing we can do is add benefit. We cannot, of course, there's ways that we can add detriment. We could say, yeah, go kill yourself, or we could invalidate them, or we could say the reason why you want to kill yourself is stupid. Of course, there are things that we can do that are explicitly going to add to their desire or capability. But again, you could say go kill yourself to a person, and ultimately it is the physical activity is out of your control. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you even try to implement any of these, if you have just listened and absorbed it and did everything wrong, the only thing you can get from this and helping people is a beneficial. You can only help. You cannot detract. You yourself cannot physically harm or kill somebody without actually doing it. This is helping someone help themselves to not do it. And so connecting to them, to these resources, whatever the risk, low, level, high, moderate or high, even if you've called 911 or taken them to the hospital, or if you're just staying with them and not letting them be alone, these are the resources that they should have. If it's 2 days after you've been in this crisis with someone, text it to them so they have this information. These are my top trusted resources. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which I believe I have all the information here. We can go back to that. So the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, I want to give you guys some pointers for yourself and others for here, because I've worked there. And so maybe this is a secret, like don't tell other people I told you this, who work in the industry, because they might be mad. But my experience of working with them is that they're overwhelmingly effective and beneficial and amazing. And for the most part, you're going to be connected to an amazing counselor on the other line. However, this is a volunteer position. And even though we have to go through rigorous training and pass tests and have practice and stuff before we get on the lines, it's still a volunteer job. So there are people that have passed all these things that just aren't as effective as others, or they just don't match your vibe. Some people communicate things differently. Some people's energy throws people off. So in these moments, if you or a friend wants to call the National Suicide Hotline, if you get connected to someone and you feel that they are being ineffective, unhelpful, even if they're not being like judgy or anything, if you just don't feel that they've helped, I recommend calling them back. You will get connected to a different counselor, unless it's like weird hours and you're in, I only really know the Los Angeles, but there could be, thank you so much, Jerry. There could be a chance that you might get connected to the same counselor, especially if they see the same number pop up. But one, if they do, you could say, you could request someone else. But for the most part, you might get directed to a totally different hotline center. You could, I would say for the most part, you'll get directed to a different person. So if someone's ineffective, call again, and you're probably gonna, the odds are you're gonna get connected with a really, really helpful, great person. These are 24/7. They are confidential, private, and free. They're anonymous. You can give them a fake name. You can call if you are suicidal, or if you are in a mental health crisis, self-harm crisis, or this is a common misconception, is that you can only call if you are suicidal. No, I call all the time, even just to consult with them. Hey, I worked at the line for this many years. I just need some consultation on this thing. But as someone who's helping another person, you could say, hi, I'm not the person in crisis, but this is what's going on. And I need some advice from you guys and what I should do. I mean, when in doubt, just call them and say, I don't know what to do in this situation. What do I do? And they will help you. This is called a third party caller. And we are also highly trained to help you guys in that situation. The crisis text line. So if you have someone who's not open to talking to someone on the phone, even though it's anonymous and confidential, and I really push those things, if someone's resistant to calling, I say you can always hang up. You don't have to stay on the phone. If they're ineffective, you can hang up. You don't have to say your name, and it's confidential. They're not going to send someone to you. In very, very rare situations does the suicide hotline secretively, I would say, connect you to 911. That is if you are you're holding a gun in your hand and you're about to shoot, and you have somehow given us information to prove that and your whereabouts. Then we will tell you, I would say 99.9% of the time, we're going to tell you, hey, we're going to connect you to emergency services, and they either help us or they hang up, right? So it's very rare that they're going to just send someone. I mean, we don't have, when you call the National Suicide Hotline, even if your number's listed, we don't have immediate access to your whereabouts, your phone, your location, your address. All of those things we don't legally have access to. So if they're going to send emergency services, you're going to know about it. So crisis text, though, is not call. That's a text service. And it's also free, 24/7, confidential. I personally have not used it, but I have talked many, many times to their counselors and their founder, and it's amazing. I recommend it. Also, again, if you get a text person that's ineffective or you're not vibing with, just end it and redo it. You will 1000% get a different person, since everybody is in all over the world doing this. Trevor Lifeline is specifically for LGBTQ people, and people who are in crisis and in suicide crisis. Their hotline is 24/7 as well. And let's see here. They now have the Trans Lifeline, which is so amazing because I mean, I've had personal experiences where I have talked to people and have referred the Trevor Lifeline, and they are like, you think I haven't already tried that? Trevor Hotline really is for the general population, and the Trans Lifeline is specifically geared towards trans lives. So that's this number. They do have limited hours. So if they're not within these hours, always just go back to the National Suicide Hotline. But the best resource that I always tell everybody that no one usually knows about is 211. And if you guys have heard about 411, it's like the information you call for information, addresses. It's like totally 90s thing. 211 is exactly like that, but it's specifically for the mental health and crisis fields. So they're trained crisis counselor operators who are trained in crisis intervention, but they're not like a crisis counselor like the suicide hotline. They're specifically to help you get in touch with resources specific to your needs. So your location, your what I love about them too is your financial ability. So if you're like, I have no money, but I need help doing this, this, and this, they'll give you the resources that are available. To your location, to your comfortability, your level of pay, to the services that you need, to the hours that they're open and when you need it. It's just it's a free 24/7 resource, bottomless resource, mental health and crisis directory and operating system. More alternative resources that I trust and recommend are all the services on NAMI.org, the National Alliance of Mental Health. all the services on the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, I don't know how we all say that. D.D. Hirsch, that is where I was trained in crisis counseling, and D.D. Hirsch also is in LA, is the bigger organization that's underneath the National Suicide Hotline, the Suicide Prevention Center. And they also have services. I highly recommend utilizing their survivors of attempts and their survivor support groups. They're the best in LA. And I mean, I just could not recommend them more. Again, survivors are people who have endured the pain that is losing someone by suicide, and survivors of suicide attempt group is for people who have themselves attempted suicide. Pineapple Support, plug, of course. Whenever anyone asks me about how they can find a therapist or a life coach or a counselor who is sex-informed, sex-safe, all across the board, my go-to is Pineapple Support. They have a highly, they interview everybody to make sure that they have these qualifications and will not allow you to be with people who are unsafe for you. So that's a really good resource for a directory and just like general questions. I do want to say that Pineapple Support isn't a crisis or emergency hotline. Hotlines are usually for time-sensitive calls, whereas warm lines are for non-time sensitive calls. Pineapple Support is more of a warm support, meaning they can offer information, services, directory resources, but if you are in an immediate crisis or questioning the level of immediate danger, they are not the go-to resource. And that is going to be 911 or the National Suicide Hotline. And then ASECT is another place that I recommend for people in your industry. I've gotten credentialed through ASECT. I met a lot of people. I actually met Leah and Pineapple Support through ASECT, and a lot of other people who are therapists that work with your community. Again, they're sex-safe therapist referral directory. It's a great community to be a part of, and great visibility. Here's just another infographic that you guys can screenshot and keep with you, just a little cheat sheet that's provided. And again, I can email if you'd like, just kind of, summarizing everything that we talked about today. And then, we don't have to really go into this, but there are other crisis services that you can utilize that are good for you to know about. I just want to say that I don't recommend some of these because they're not sensitive to time. So some people, if you've heard of PMRT, Psychiatric Mobile Response Team, these people are supposed to be like 911, but for mental health crisis services. And because of we have no government funding or support. So a lot of these things like lack workers and education and funding. And so I would say majority of the time they could be effective, but they're not going to be able to show up right away. It's just no guarantee. They do have walk-in emergency clinics for crisis. When I say take the person to the nearest ER, I don't mean a clinic. I mean an ER, like a hospital's ER. But they have one of these in each of the towns in LA that are trained and specialized in mental health crisis, and these are good to know about. They have one in San Fernando Valley, downtown, West Los Angeles, South Los Angeles, and Long Beach area. And I can get you these specific connects if you'd like, or you can go to the link on the bottom there, screenshot the page. And then, nearest emergency room, peer-based crisis services like support groups that you can find through those websites I gave you earlier. And then just lastly, regardless of anything, if ever your safety or the safety of the other person in crisis is up in the air, on the line, or in question, 911 is the answer, or take them to the nearest emergency room. And if those aren't doable, or if they feel unsafe, then the next best thing is to ensure that they are not alone until you trust that they can keep themselves safe or that they could be connected to professional care. For clarity, confirmation, or questions about anything, you can call the National Suicide Hotline or 211 for resources. And yeah, that is that. So please let me know. I mean, I wonder if I'm gonna exit out and stop sharing my screen, oops, and see if anybody is left here, if I'm just talking to myself. Yeah, is there any questions? Anything? Okay, awesome. If anybody has any questions or would like to get in touch with me, you can find me at my personal email is a@amandatrclemens.com. Or you could reach out to Pineapple Support or Leah and find my information. If you just need to get more information or you want more info on what I talked about or any of these slides today, you can reach out to Pineapple Support and Leah. And I really am honored to be here and appreciate all the time and energy that you guys have put into fighting for your industry and the people in it. Thank you and happy World Suicide Prevention Day.